right, everybody. Well, first, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited about today's conversation because, one, the story of Abacus Bank is an incredible one. And if you haven't actually seen the documentary, I highly recommend it. It's actually a really beautifully told story. But also, I'm really excited to be here with Jill because Jill is absolutely kick-ass and so impressive. And I think we were having this conversation earlier about the example you set also for Asian American women in leadership positions, particularly in the financial services space. So thank you for being with us tonight. We're so excited to have you. And thank you to everybody who's here tonight to hear about these topics. We hope that part of this conversation is something that you can also take away back into the communities and the companies that you're a part of, because this is part of an important story that we want to keep telling. So first, Jill, tell us a little bit about Abacus, the mission behind the bank, and the community it serves.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you, Binna, and Dan, and Caroline for organizing this. I am very honored, and I have some people from our bank here as well, to still have this chance to be able to share our experience with people. And I do think it's still relevant about what we went through, especially during these times where it's not very easy times right now. So I really wanted to thank you guys for giving us opportunity to share our experience. So Abacus Federal Savings Bank is a federal savings and loan association. We're chartered by the federal government to provide financing and deposit services to our customer and our community. We're actually also a minority depository institution, which is defined under federal law as an institution that's owned by a minority group. The minority groups that they recognize are Asian American, African American, Latino, and Native American. And my father started the bank about 40 years ago now. It's been 40 years. And he did it with a mission to serve the Asian American community in New York City. And that's how we started.
Amazing. So I know some of you have seen the documentary, which was Oscar nominated, which is amazing. But if you haven't heard about this story, what's wild is that for those of you who were maybe present or were aware when the 2008 crisis happened, and we all know about the big banks and everything that happened, Abacus was the only U.S. bank prosecuted in relation to the crisis at the time, which is completely wild. And surprisingly, obviously, none of the big banks. So do you think that because Abacus was a Chinese-led bank serving the Chinese community, do you think that played a factor in why they came after the bank?
So to answer that question, you kind of have to understand all the different parties involved. So the prosecutor who made the decision, ultimately it's the prosecutor's decision, it was the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and the DA at that time was Cy Vance. So Cy, unfortunately, Mr. Vance has now garnered a reputation. He's no longer in his position, I think, of sort of liking to go after the weak and the smaller and letting more powerful go. I think after us, there were other stories about how he let the Trump kids go. It was during the same time period, apparently, that they were looking at that. So this is sort of the mentality of the person that's making the ultimate decision to prosecute. And then also, like if you saw the documentary, they were really fortunate, the documentarians, to actually interview him. Because I'm not sure if I would have done that if I were him. I mean, it's kind of, he was a sitting DA at that point. But he said something that, I never got a chance to talk to him, but actually hear him say that. And he said, I prosecuted them no different. I treated them no different, Abacus different than I would have treated an Indian bank or a South American bank or something like that. And I was like, oh, okay. So there is clearly, some people call it implicit bias, unconscious biasness. I don't like to put the word implicit or conscious or unconscious on it because it's just bias, right? Mm-hmm. And some people will take it further and say, well, it was discrimination. Some people say it was racism. I think his calculus was very clearly, I'm going to pick on a bank that they're never going to fight back. I want something to say I prosecuted a bank for the 2008 financial crisis. There were actually news reports that he did subpoena Chase during this time period and chose not I don't know whether it was the federal government who stopped him, but clearly he did not pursue them. And so, yes, I think the fact we were small, the fact we were serving a community, I think that's the part that speaks more to this issue. A community that was considered to be relatively passive, quiet, and probably won't fight back. So in that way, I do think these factors play into his decision about coming after us.
So we just talked about community, and a lot of us actually are familiar with the topic of, or the term, community banks. And in terms of serving a community, I wanted to ask you about how you view your role, both as a CEO, but also as an advocate for the community. I know you've spoken out about anti-API violence, but how do you view your role as both an individual, as part of the community, as an executive advocating for the community, when also the community are your clientele? So how do you view that?
So I think I'm very fortunate to be able to say that my persona and how I personally believe, my beliefs, actually I can do it in my work environment. And I don't actually know if everyone has that privilege. Really, I talk to people and not everyone has that. And I think that's something that's very precious and was actually given to me. It's a privilege. This was started because of my father giving me this chance. So what I do and what I personally believe is correct, we really do follow through as much as we can. I mean, except for maybe some people will say, well, that's not 100% correct, that you may have charged this customer that fee. But generally, our principles and how we do our business is guided by how we believe is correct. We're for profit. We're not a nonprofit. We have to make money to be able to generate capital, because we need to have capital. As a bank or as a regulator will take us out. We don't generate capital through a public market, so we need to make money. But all that capital is pulled back into the bank. We have never paid a dividend to any shareholder. So that is how we have sort of like a nonprofit status, in that we use that capital we make to leverage and ensure we can continue to provide the services we have. So that gives us that freedom. I take it very seriously, our mission. I don't think of just within our own Asian American community. I try to explain to my children, like, what are you doing? Like, why do you have to go to DC? Or I'm part of an Independent Community Bankers of America. That's our association. We lobby on DC once a year. I tell my children, I'm like, basically what I'm doing is preserving your right as a consumer to have a choice. Because if the financial system becomes truly a monopoly of one or two banks, you pretty much guarantee that every other company is going to be like that, right? How are you going to be able to survive as an individual small business when you have only two banks to deal with? You will not have the power to be able to say, I'm going to walk away. I don't want to do business with you. So you have to conform to what one or two banks may say. And then that passes on to you as a consumer, because your business that you do business with will not be able to have a choice, and you ultimately will not have to have a choice. And then you also are consumers of financial services, and you also will become part of that same ecosystem. So I think that's really, really important, that we have smaller banks and that we have the ability to make choices. And that's what I really, that's what I do.
So related to choice, we talk a lot about financial inclusion, and it's one of those things that I feel like a lot of financial services firms talk about, and banks certainly talk about. But practically speaking, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? Like, how can a bank like yours act or behave differently or market differently in order to be more inclusive to the community it serves?
So because we target our community that we serve, we're mission-based, we can very much focus on programs and services that we believe our community needs. For example, we talked about this before in the past. There are products and services like passbook savings accounts that most big banks have kind of left and let go, because it's just a really high cost, high price product. You need a lot of touch on it. But our customers need it. We have a lot of accounts still in that area. So we would be able to say, okay, even though it's not cost effective, I will focus on it and market it, and and make sure that my customers still have access to it. And I will try to do it in a way, in a manner that I can still cover my cost, right? And still make something on top of that, to make sure I have the capital to do this continually. So once again, I think it goes back to having this freedom to be able to say, this is who we are, this is our mission, and we're going to focus specifically on that. The larger banks are not. They are creatures of the public markets. They're creatures of stock markets. They're creatures of, is their share price going to drop or not? I was, walking around with a community banker the other day, and he said when he first became CEO, it's actually a mutual organization, so the depositors own it. He said he spoke to a larger regional bank CEO, and that bank CEO said to him, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't ever go public. So, I mean, I'm just saying to that. So he obviously, his bank was public and he felt kind of constrained. So, I understand when you're in the public market, that's the theory of capitalism, and there is an efficiency and you're supposed to drive profit, and profit's good. But in a very large context, you can't customize things. You can't address things, that I can.
Absolutely. So some of us, or actually quite a few of us in this room, are either in the field of marketing, communications, and we do have banks that we represent. Some of us target banks. Do you have any advice for us in terms of how we can help banks be more inclusive? Either how they talk about themselves, what they do. Do you have advice for us and for all of us in this room?
I'm a very bad marketing person. Grace knows, we're always fumble. But I think I remember some of my marketing class in business school. It was like, you got to focus on who your market is, right? But once again, I think that's the problem. When you're really part of a big company, I don't know how you do that. I have no idea how to do it. But when we do it, we really focus on, we try to be a little bit go against. If they're going this way, we're trying to figure out maybe we should go this way, just to allow us to distinguish ourselves a little bit more. So I think that my advice comes from a small company, and I don't know if it applies to a bigger company, but if everyone is doing DEI initiatives and everyone's doing this marketing and adding the Asian person on the advertisement, that's probably not now you're going to get lost in the whole, you know what I mean? So I don't know how, in a big company, I don't know how that works, that maybe you're worried. You're like, oh, everyone's doing it, so if I don't do it, then I'm going to look bad. But then if you do it, then you kind of get lost,
right.
And it's like, oh, you're just following everybody. So I think the other thing is try to be as real as possible and sincere, I mean, you can't, once again, I don't know how a big company does that. But I keep going back, you see suddenly these advertisements with an Asian person, and you're like, well, what does that mean? I got these people laughing, Sherry's laughing at me. But I'm just saying, they pop up suddenly, you're like, oh, okay. Does it appeal? Yes, there's representation, but, what is that person doing? How does it affect what they're doing? Who they are? So I think it's hard when you work for a large corporation how to do that. But that's the best I could. I don't know. That's the best I could do.
No, I think it's a hard one to solve, and I think we talk at Vested a lot about authenticity and not about bandwagoning or ticking the box or just sticking a person of a particular demographic on an ad and calling it a day, but really about understanding the audience. Why are you targeting that audience, and is it coming from an authentic place? Otherwise, to your point, what are we really doing?
Right.
So I want to shift tactics a little bit and talk about something that is near and dear to my heart too, which is about stereotypes that exist in the AAPI community and how that affects us each and every day. One thing is this idea of the model minority stereotype, and some folks in this room might have heard of the model minority stereotype, others may not have not, and I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit about how you would describe what that is, but also potentially how it fails to recognize the diaspora of the AAPI community, which is something I'm sure you think about and face as a bank as well. So would love your thoughts on that.
So I have to go back to my AAPI history, which I can't remember. I did it in college. I actually did a tutorial on this. But in my understanding correctly, model minority, that terminology was imposed by the majority people culture. It was not, we did not take on that term. We never came up with it. So if I was going to say that it's all about power, right? It's a term that it's a classification of term that is done by the majority culture to try to corral and categorize a certain group of people within a certain way. And then the effect on that is that group is disenfranchised, honestly. And also creates a conflict among other minority groups, which is also highly damaging. And I actually believe that probably was created primarily for that, to not allow minority groups to say, well, this is the model one, which means that other minority groups are not models, right? So now we are less incentivized to join or unite in common causes, which takes away every minority's power. So I have a big problem with it, obviously. Then to go more into details, you're saying, this concept of model minority basically was saying that this minority group was a model citizen, right? We have high education, we go and make a lot of money, we don't want to cause too much trouble, we just want to basically fit into the majority culture, so we're going to do whatever we can do to do that. Once again, going back to this concept, we want to be part of the majority culture, so we're not going to fight back. So there's a passiveness to it. I have a problem with that. Clearly, it affects how we are perceived and unfortunately, how we perceive ourselves, which I think is actually more damaging, is how we perceive ourselves. Because it's very hard to break out of that perception if that's what you believe when you look at yourself in the mirror. And it's not true. There's multiple communities within our community. There's multiple people who are not doing well, and for whatever reasons or not reasons. We have many different opinions about things. I mean, politically, we're across the spectrum right now. I think there's articles now written that, there's a lot of red going on, and there's traditionally we're blue. So it's a very bad term. I think from a marketing standpoint, I think it would be very bad to follow that term because it takes away what we just talked about, sort of dehumanizing your target market.
Another term that I've heard more recently is this thing called the bamboo glass ceiling.
Yes.
And I know the women in this room have probably heard of the glass ceiling. And one thing that I've talked about with fellow API female leaders is sometimes the double standard or the double challenge of being both a woman, of being an API background, and what that means for us. And I'd love for you to share maybe a little bit about, has that affected you, and if so, how?
So I was lucky once again because I didn't have to fight my way to the top. It was unfortunately for me, but I always say unfortunately to other people because they don't have this opportunity, that it was given to me. But I do see, like my sister and other people in the community, that there is the bamboo ceiling, and I think that is a term we came up with ourselves. So I'm going to claim it, like as an Asian American woman, we do it, and Asian American male. That was something. So I think it comes from many different angles, and I think it's two-way, honestly. I think it comes from above, oppression downward, but I also think it's our responsibility to fight up against it. And I'm not saying that it's easy to do that, but I'm saying that we do have a responsibility to push hard against it and not to just accept it. And I think it requires a lot of collaboration and organizing, even in a corporate environment. I'm not talking like we're labor unions or whatever, but affinity groups, whatever, you have to really organize, and you have to, because you just say one voice is not enough. And there is, I think, fear about that sometimes. Like if I say something or I share something with somebody, they're going to go and tell somebody else. So you have to establish that trust. And that's part of the problem, because everyone's like thinking they're fighting for one little scrap of whatever. But really, if we could unite and collaborate, you might get more. You're not fighting for just one scrap. You're fighting for the whole thing, right? So I think that's the only way really to fight the bamboo ceiling. Otherwise, they're just going to pick you off and say, "Oh, look, there's someone up there," right? The tokenization, like, you shouldn't be worried about this. You're fine. There's someone up there, but it doesn't really mean anything.
I'm going to actually pause quickly for questions because I have like another zillion questions. But before we keep going, any questions so far from the audience? Go ahead, Laura.
What is the most fulfilling part of your job for you?
I think that, like I was saying before, that I can come into the office having a pretty clear, I think, principled in my mind, and knowing that I'm following that compass. And I think that's the most compelling part of it. I did work outside in a law firm for a couple of years before I went to work for my father's bank. And, it's more about assignments. I'm gonna get this assignment done. I'm gonna get this assignment done. I'm gonna fill out my timesheets, right? And that I knew I could not sustain myself in a job. And I needed that feeling of like I'm doing something beyond this assignment.
The question I have is, how do you balance of the resistance of playing victimhood versus really facing there is true stereotyping, right, against whether it's women or Asian, whether it's because of race or that, right? Because coming from the Asian culture, I think we all are raised by work damn hard,
Right.
earn your way out, right? Don't do the victimhood thing. But the truth is there is stereotyping, subtle or non-subtle, right, along the way. So how do you balance that in your own personal experience?
So I think one way to think about it is when you're pursuing what you believe is right for you, it's not you're a victim, it's you earn it. This is yours. It's just not being given to you. Do you know what I mean? When you say victim, I don't know. For me, I feel like it's more like, it makes me feel powerless, right? But more when you go in, you're saying, I should have gotten this, right? This really rightly belongs to me. Let me figure out a way how I can convince this other person that is true. So that's how I try to balance it out. I don't want to think victim because it makes me feel powerless, but I do acknowledge and believe that things have not been fair. Things have not been correct. And is there a way for me to try to, in my space at this particular moment, try to correct that? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I get it. Because while you're acknowledging it, you don't associate that with whatever that is,
right?
So, but only point out the unfairness.
Right. Right. I mean, and it's hard to say it's unfair because then they're like, oh, you're crying about it, da da da. But you have to kind of frame it like the other way to think about it also is to say it's a disadvantage for you, the other side, not to do this because here are the blah 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 reasons, right? Yeah. That try to find that mutual ground where, maybe you're missing something that you didn't see here. I'm gonna, let me show you what you may have been missing. In a nice way, right? You don't have to come in screaming and say, you're stupid, whatever. But try to find that, because that's a part of being diversity, actually, is to see something that person did not see, right? And nowadays, it's probably a real problem for them that they didn't see it, right?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you this more kind of core business question, but I got to preface this question by saying, I did not see the documentary.
It's okay.
But I'm
It's okay.
more of a reader.
Mm-hmm.
And it's extraordinarily obvious, without rehashing it all, that you were singled out, right? I mean, they wouldn't perp walk Jamie Dimon or Lloyd Frankenstein. And the moral hazard of whether or not Doc Jones or Pastor has nothing to do with you. You did the right thing. So. I don't want to go away from that, but as I look at your business model and I look at your challenges, something you said earlier really strikes me. You talked about the savings accounts that you're running, which are extraordinarily high touch. When you are a community banker, you don't have a supermarket of business loans, right? So how do you talk about how you can continue to diversify and grow your business so that you can, because everything here is important, but you do need to be profitable. You do need to grow to create capital that you can lend out and extend your business model. So
how do we do it?
Understanding how you stay true to that mission, but what you do to extend your business line to keep serving that mission.
So that's a very good question, and it's something that's not I can easily answer. We have multiple discussions strategically every month. What we say is this: as long as our community needs us, we will be here. And if they don't need us, then we don't need to be here. So we start with that premise, okay? Yes, and you're correct, our community is changing. And it's very difficult to sometimes serve the person who's still using a passbook savings account versus the person who wants to be online. It is high cost. It's really high. So what we do is I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to leverage this process. And the good news is technology. Technology in that way has been super helpful to us to lower that cost. So like I will collaborate. I do a lot of collaboration. We don't make up our own online banking platform. We will use our core data processor platform. So that's how to do it. We can't create things ourselves here, but we have to collaborate with partnerships to ensure that we can deliver those services. And we have to be very aware, as you pointed out, that things are changing. We can't ignore it. We are very aware that there are things that our customer wants that we are not able to provide right now. And we lose customers because of that. Very aware of that. So what we have to do is really try to be better, right? It's an impossible sometimes task, but we have to strive for it. And it's not, I think the hardest problem is finding people. Grace is my retail branch manager, vice president back there. It's trying to find people with like mind who believe that same thing. Like if you can find people who really believe in that, it becomes so much easier, right? Because they're going to naturally come back to you and say, well, this customer says this. Is there a way for us to fix it and do it right? So I actually think it's possible. Everything's possible.
So net promoters are important.
Yeah, just basically, well, I know that sounds like a marketing word, but I'm just saying, yeah. But I'm just saying, like building a team, right? You got to build your team, and you got to find people who are willing to be part of that team. And that, I think, is probably the hardest part, is trying to get people to really believe in that. Especially nowadays, because I think there's a lot of different options for a lot of younger people, right? They see the world, they see being like an influencer. Like my own kid's like, I don't want to work. And I'm like, why don't you want to work? Because I could be an influencer. I can make thousands of dollars a day. And I'm like, no, you can't. He's like, yes, I can, because you see, this blah, blah, blah is blah, blah, blah.
So my question, like, at the philosophical root, my question was not, like, I feel like a community banking model is important, but I want to understand, is it sustainable?
I believe it's sustainable.
Of it is the challenge I'm getting.
Yeah, it's sustainable.
Yes.
I believe it's sustainable. And the fact that we're still here is pretty much a testament to that.
Thank you so much.
And then we actually are still growing is a testament. We manage our growth very carefully. We turn away business. We say we don't want it because I'm very concerned about being too big and not be able to do it. And also as a bank, I have to worry about things like liquidity and balance sheet and asset liability management. But there is continued demand that we cannot fulfill. So in that way, I do believe people still want that community banking model. And you can see it every day. It's like it comes in waves. But lately I hear so much, and just not me, my sisters, my friends are saying how they hate their big bank for business right now.
Yeah.
And I'm almost like don't need to do anything because the big banks ultimately do something, and then it's like they're all pissed off. You know what I mean? So like we see the opportunity. I can't take all those customers, but I tell Grace, I'm like, we need to create a product that we can get targeted. Once again, these customers are having this issue. I'll target and I'll hopefully make their lives easier. I can't take everybody, but I think I can help one group of people of this group of people.
Yeah, I have a related question to that, which is sometimes when people talk about financial inclusion, they think unprofitable or bad for business or, okay, it's the right thing to do, but it's not the right thing for the business. What would be your argument against that? What's like the business case for why mid-size, even larger banks should be spending more time thinking about how to bring more demographics into the banking system?
I don't know if larger banks can do it, honestly. I mean, they have been set up to be like machines, right? Every single input is supposed to produce a certain amount. And if they change that, tweak that a little bit, it's going to completely mess up the machine. We've seen it over and over again. I was telling you, Binna, I think maybe. We see waves of customers come in like every 5 years. Oh, my big bank wants to close my account. We have no idea why, but suddenly a whole bunch of letters, like people come to us like, oh, blah, blah is open, closing my account. So I think they do like a sort of like a reaping of customers like every 5 years that I consider unprofitable. How I handle it, I don't have a large operation, right? I have, that's what I'm saying. It's hard on my people, right? Because it's exhausting. My teller probably does more work than Chase's teller does in Midtown. I'm pretty sure, because they're handling a lot of people coming in. But it's not easy. You have to keep working at it and finding the efficiency. And like I said, we have to try to find that mix of technology. And I do think technology has been a very important factor for us at this point.
Float, you're still your primary.
Float in terms of, yeah. But that's, as you know, very hard to manage. So we have to watch that. There's still fee income, but generally as a traditional community bank, you're still on float. Yeah.
I was asked this question, so I'm going to ask you this question, which is, if you hoped for some sort of change or decision that you felt would positively impact the API community in the next 5 to 10 years, like, what is the thing that you would want people to know or an action to take place? Is there something you hope for the community?
Oh God, that's a big question.
I got asked the question. It was a tough one, so yeah.
I think we should be organizing better. We're starting to do it, and we see it. Like if there's an issue, like in the past, something pops up, like maybe there was like a really insulting thing that happened on the media. Sometimes, in the past you'd see nothing happen. Now you see people like jumping up. Even within our community, we have a big issue going on in Chinatown. They're building a mega jail, and like I've been really involved with this advocacy piece and organizing around it. And something happened to like one of the next door senior center who's being like really besieged by this construction. They had a cracking in the wall. They reached out to my group, and immediately we got news on it, and was able to push back and get the contractor to like react. I think that's different. I don't think that happened in the past. But to actually have news media, like, so Arthur Chan and forgot his name on Channel 7, I should know him, to have like journalists who are Asian American who are like, I'm interested in that story, this is about my community, to jump in to do it. And that has an effect on it. And so we were like, yeah, you can't mess around with us, because we will bring light to this. So I think the organization and jumping to when you see an issue has definitely gotten better, and I think we should do that more often. I would like to see more political officers. Like I was in DC last week lobbying. I was telling you, I saw like about 4 or 5 congressional offices. There was not one Asian American person that I spoke to, not one. And I know there were some legislative aides that I couldn't get to meet that were Asian American, but not one. And I this is like the 10th year I've done this, and it's every year. Not, I'm like, where is our representation in Washington, D.C.? Where are they? Oh, and actually, that's not true. I'm sorry. I had one. I saw Grace Ming from Flushing. So that's wrong. I shouldn't say that. But other than her, there was no legislative aide. There was no policy person who was Asian American. And I think that goes back to the model minority myth. Oh, that doesn't make a lot of money. Oh, like, why would you want to do that? Like, it's going nowhere. It's in a circle. But these people are like, these young kids, they're making policy. And they're listening to us. And they have influence. So that's what I would hope, is that our community becomes more into these areas.
Thank you. Yeah.
Your comment on government now kind of ties into something that I've been wondering about and thinking about, is the type of government that is more closed, such as a Chinese government, but even other Asian nations such as Singapore and things of that nature that are more under more of a closed government. How does that affect your community that you're serving? Does that play a role at all? And just in a broader sense, you kind of see both sides of that. How should financial institutions continue to contribute to capitalism, democracy, etc.? And I think your comment of what you just said about not seeing enough Asian Americans in our democratic system is really like a visual representation of maybe that dissonance. So just kind of a commentary on that.
I think the first generation, the ones who are coming from countries like China, they are afraid for interaction in the government. We do see that. It's quite normal. And I think that's where, going back to your comment, like, how do you continue to keep these customers? Because you develop the trust that happens. They are not necessarily going to be in the banking system unless they trust you. as part of that system. So that is difficult. I look at the I'm second generation, meaning I was born here and my parents were not. And I look at the third generation because I have children, and our customers, some of these are third generation now. We're talking millennials, Gen Zs. That generation, I think they have, and I took upon myself, we do have I guess I was talking to my sister about this as a legal term, a fiduciary duty to ensure that we were given a lot, like our parents sacrificed a lot. And we all know this. So we can sit there, I mean, I see everyone's nodding their heads who's Asian American. My father came, he did not get what he didn't get to go to college, just going to college. He had to work during the day. At law school, when he went to law school, he told us he was so tired sometimes because he was working for a time. The only time he had to sleep was sitting on the toilet. Okay? And when he studied for the bar, he was studying on the subway. And I got to study in the bar the whole summer. You know what I mean? So like we were given a lot. So I feel like we have a fiduciary duty to our community, to our parents, and to the generations before us to now follow through in ensuring what we do. So I do think the responsibility is on the second, third, and the generation. Now I am worried about my children because they're far away from what and I'm probably part of that because I protected them or whatever. But I want to make sure they, that's my fears. I don't want them to forget what I saw and what the stories that my parents have told us. So that's going to be a challenge. I know, Binna, you have children.
That's what I was getting at in my question. So. I don't think you have a strict legal fiduciary, but you assume one. But
yeah.
The story that you just told, which is amazing, you feel a personal lineage responsibility. So much of financial services is impersonal and transactional. And for a lot of people, if you make it low cost, that works. You're invested in making it personal in a way. And that goes back to my earlier question, which I didn't enunciate very well, which is like, how do you do good but also do well by this capitalizing on this personalization and on this connection and this narrative pull through? And I'm fascinated by it, and I want to understand how you continue. Like, what's the next 100 years look like on that? It's just an amazing thing, right? Because so for me, it's Vanguard and cheap, and I don't want to talk to my financial advisor. It's an entirely different thing. For your clients, it's extraordinarily different.
Right. Yeah. And are you saying that maybe one day our community may not, may be more like you? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know that. In fact, I think maybe that's the wrong way.
Right.
Maybe
well,
the right way is to maintain this level of personalization, but what does that look like?
I think that the pendulum always swings, and it may take another generation or so. But people are like, "Oh, you gotta look out for." Like we have our regulars telling us, "You need to make sure you're handling the millennials and the omegas or deltas." I don't, what's the alphas? Is that what it is? Okay, alphas. My son just barely missed the alpha mark, and I do think there is an issue like about what they're going to look like. But look what happened to us. Like. With this DA's office, it wasn't supposed to happen to me. I was born here. I barely speak Chinese. I speak English. I was educated here, but it happened to me. So I think we're not a society that can easily move through this. There's a lot of issues we're seeing. It's still coming up. It's popping up everywhere. And so I think the personalization issue and this concept of choice will continue for a very long time. We are not going to be in my feeling, I'm saying this like I'll probably be dead by the time whether or not this is true or not, but I don't believe automation is going to take over the world. Okay. You personally, I get it. Like my husband's the same way. He's like, I don't want to talk to a financial advisor, but that's maybe because you're really good at what you do.
That's my point. You're exactly right. I think you're right. I just like the future of your intimate relationship with your community is extraordinarily interesting to me. It's so foreign to my own experience, and that's fine. But what you're doing with it is fascinating to me. But how can you continue to, be that for-profit organization and make it work and serve your client base, even as it grows and becomes third and fourth and fifth and sixth generation. And so it's not a question, it's just
a thought.
admiration.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I think the pendulum is going to swing back because, I mean, I left China 2-3 decades ago, right? Going back, looking at the next generation, after they have now the next generation have all the money, come to the U.S., experience all this stuff. But I was pleasantly shocked how if you go back to China right now, like, it's flush with money. But actually the culture is stronger than ever. Like, people are actually going back, bring back everything. Because I always use the example, like, when your belly is full, you start to want more. So the community, I think, is going to come, that community building mission is going to come back to really benefit you, right? Just even the next generation of those social influencers, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, my son he still considers himself, he's half, like Asian,
Right.
right? And I know that for a bank like yours can completely appeal to them emotionally. And he could be very well becoming the social influencer, right? For adults.
Yeah, so that's yes, we've seen this phenomenon where a lot of third generation are coming back to Chinatown.
Yeah.
We know this. We have groups that we work with. They take pride in their background and who they are. And you're right. That's going to be the challenge as to how to market ourselves to them in this context.
I mean, even just this discussion, right? It gives, a third generation Asian American pride, right? Like, you're like, I'll open an account at Abacus. Like, I want to support this community bank. And I love your questions because community banks are the confluence of mission and commerce, right?
Right.
Like, how do you serve a community in a way that's profitable? But, what I would love to hear is sort of like bringing it back to the personal. Like, when you talk to your kids, like, what is the one, like, sort of point of guidance that you give them? Because you've been through so much, right? You're a second or third generation. Like, I have those. And I'm like, how do you guide them? Like, what, like, to give them purpose, but also responsibility and ownership of their own destiny. Like, so bringing it back to the personal, like, what is, like, a good...
I can't tell. I'm terrible as a parent. I mean, I complain about my kids all the time to my coworkers, and I'm like, oh. My daughter is going to be 18 in a month, and my son is going to be 15. So they're going through teenagers. They did experience, obviously, what I went through. I try to shield them as much as possible. I didn't want them to, like, one of my biggest fear was, like, I was going to get arrested. I didn't actually get arrested. I was spared. They didn't have anything. They shouldn't have anything. They didn't find anything on me. But and some of my coworkers who were, the one who reported to me, unfortunately, they went through a horrible situation. The perp walk, getting arrested. There's things that the film didn't talk about. They got arrested and, shuffled through a very inhumane process. Anyway, but my point is, like, what my biggest fear was, like, oh, I might get arrested for all my kids. That would have been, like, a really traumatic point, right? But so I try to shield them because I didn't want them to get. They were too young at that point. Like, my son was born in August 2009, and the incident that's triggered this was December 2009. So I barely, I just had given birth, and I was like, oh. So I kind of handed him off to, like, a babysitter, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go to work now and deal with this. But so my daughter, though, she's very strong-willed, and I think she sees this, right? So, but I have to let her find it in her own way. I think that you got to have faith that if they see what you do, like I said to them, I'm trying to tell them, I'm preserving your right to have a choice one day. If I put it in a simple term, my son's like, no, they start laughing, like, oh, you're talking about Fannie Mae, the bank all the time. But I think it's like this drill. Like, I do believe my daughter is absorbing it. She wants to be a lawyer. Well, we'll see what happens. But she's very clear. She's like, I want to be a lawyer. And I want to advocate. I want to be advocacy. So my son is a little bit different, but we'll see. But I think if you gotta believe that it's being talked about, it's being said, it's there somewhere. And even though it doesn't look like it, they haven't, I do worry about it. I gotta believe it's there. It's exhausting though, to think about it in that piece.
I mean, I think the thing, so I was talking about that earlier. So my partner is from Puerto Rico, and when I met her, we were chatting, and I said, so, you're an American. She said, oh no, I'm a colonized. So my lesson, but the point is, and she kept pushing me on my identity, and I'm like, I don't feel like I really have one, right? And so who you are and the work that you're doing is profoundly different to most of what happens. And so my boss was previously the CEO of commercial banking at JP Morgan. Like she has opened thousands and thousands of branches around the country, but there's no connection. You're in and out. So what you're doing is so extraordinarily different and so valuable. And yet, as the documentary proved, you're also at risk because you are small.
And we're different. They were different, yes.
Yeah.
And so the vibrancy of keeping that going is, to me, is like the most important thing. And how you, whether it's through your commitment to your customers, but your commercialization, your ideas, like whatever things you can do to keep it going seems important to me. And yet so different than my own experience.
I appreciate that. There's not a question there, right? I get it. No, I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that. Yeah. No, but I do think going back to your issue, you say, well, how can you survive and make profit? Like I said before, we're an institution that does not pay profit out to the shareholder. So we're very, very, very different. If you talk to a lot of community banks, you're not going to see that unless you're mutual, right? We're very, very different. And I consider that to be a privilege, like I said, a huge privilege that I have been able to be in that way. So that's why I think it's very important that we continue doing what we do. Because I even talk to any community bank, even they're small, it's a different mentality. That's why I consider ourselves to be quasi nonprofit in that sense.
We probably have time. Yeah, I was gonna say we probably have time for one more question, and then I know we could probably keep talking all night. So yes, sorry, go ahead.
I have a question that's something from a business perspective, right? Have you thought about just growing on the line of building a community, building the actual advocates to almost a marketplace, right? Actually welcoming some third-party products, because you talked about how you lost some clients because of your size, you can't, provide additional products. Have you thought about, because I'm just thinking there is so much proud within the Asian community, the next generation, and they want to support that. And have you thought about just jumping on that, like that momentum while it's still at infancy, and really start to commercialize that feeling or monetize that community by welcoming your potential competitors, right? Become really a financial marketplace for the next generation of Asian Americans.
Yes, we have thought about that. And like I said, we are collaborating very, very much and as carefully as we can. We cannot offer unless we collaborate, for sure. I don't know if I would welcome my competitors because I don't necessarily want them. And I don't even know sure who my competitors are in this context.
So frenemy strategy.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't even know what competitor frenemy means in this context, but what I'm saying is if the product is there and we can incorporate it in Grace, by the way, I keep pointing to her because I keep looking at her because these are things we talk about every day and we're exhausted and we do this we're like, oh my God, I have to do this, I have to do this. It is exhausting because it's not like we're going to hand off this and say, go, implement it. That's part of it, making it personal, right? Like when she's putting a product before me, I'm the CEO. Can you imagine JP Diamond literally going through every single piece going, okay, first of all, let's look at the risk, right? And then what if my customer does this on this? What if my customer does that? It's so specific. And I wish sometimes I don't have to do that. But someone said to me, like, what did I find most interesting in my job? That's part of what I find most interesting in my job is actually to be able to have that chance to be able to go like, will this product, how would it play out? How will this work out? So we're doing it. It's just it's exhausting. That's part of what we have to go through to do it. But I agree with you. My father started, like, we have an insurance agency underneath the bank subsidiary. We have a broker-dealer on a subsidiary. It's just a matter of how the best to implement it. And it's really people power, brain power.
Jill, I just want to say thank you for spending this time with us. Your story, I think the story of Abacus continues to be really powerful. Maybe everyone will leave and open an Abacus account after today.
Up to you guys.
For everyone here, please do feel free to stick around, hang out. I'm sure we can continue the conversation with Jill, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Binna. Thank you, Veston.